All right. Hello, hello. Nice to see you folks. And Tareen, we're just getting started here. Cal, could you put the slide up on the screen? Yeah. We will get started in a couple minutes as we wait for folks to come in here. We will we have the interpreter pinned. We'll be using that service. And we'll be dropping some access copies for you to use for this workshop in the chat. Yeah, your Sunday is going well. Periodically be putting that link in there to see all of CT's stuff. If you would like to, you can go ahead and rename yourself to put your name, put your bio, put your pronouns in your name, just so you can let folks know how to address you. But we'll get started in a second. Also be going over some access stuff just at the start. Let folks know what to expect from today. But yeah. Awesome. Hopefully the weather is nice where you are at. It is very windy here in Arkansas. So it starts to actually feel like fall. Hopefully you are having fall happen wherever you are as well.
We're very excited. We're going to get a huge thunderstorm tomorrow, which is desperately needed because it has been dry as a bone.
If you are, yes, exactly. And if you are hoping for a transcription, we are using something called Otter AI, which you should be able to access at the top for transcription as well. And I will also put on the Zoom captions, but you can also use that service. Yeah, so I will go ahead and just get started here. I'm going to just read a little bit from our just so introduce whoever I am to y'all. So you can follow along there. So hello, my name is CD, and we are Open Mouth Literary Center, which is a nonprofit literary organization based in Fayetteville, Arkansas. We host a monthly poetry reading and workshop with our visiting writers, as well as an annual retreat festival and a residency for local writers here in Northwest Arkansas. Our goal is to bring poets and poetry lovers in contact with nationally touring poets and create greater community through writing. At each of our readings, we have an open round of community readers who read a single poem. It could be a poem that they've written, a poem that they love. And we'll be doing that later tonight. So at 7 p.m., definitely come back here to see CT and some opening readers read. I'm excited about that. The slots for that reading are full, but we're always excited to have new folks read. So if you're interested in reading at one of our events later on, you can sign up for that there. Just put the link for that in the chat. You can also get more information about our future events on our website, where you can also sign up for our newsletter that we send out periodically just for updates on what we're doing. And the other thing we just want to mention is that we pay all of our featured poets, and we've taken steps to increase accessibility at our events by reading our access statement, which we'll do in a second, providing ASL interpretation and access documents and captioning these recordings. We also actively solicit feedback, so please let us know which services you're using, which services that we can improve on. But these have increased our workload and expenses, though we want to ensure that there aren't any cost barriers to our events. So we do invite attendees to pay what they can for these services, for these workshops, for these readings, and to help sustain this by signing up to give regularly through our Patreon, by donating at the link on our website, or continuing just to come to our events. Having you here is enough in many ways. You can make one-time donations through PayPal, Venmo, or Cash App. And all of these donations are going towards supporting these efforts, paying for access materials, paying for interpretation. So we thank you for helping to ensure all of that. If you have any interest in following us on social media, Twitter, or donating, there are some links for that there in the chat. And so I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to pass it over to Cal to tell us a little bit more about access services for today in particular. So take it away, Cal.
All right. Thank you, CD. So we've been working to make our programs more accessible for this online format. We are taking the step of highlighting access features on Zoom, providing an ASL interpreter for our monthly readings and workshops, as well as collecting and offering visual aid materials. We've also completed a course with an accessibility consultant to better understand and apply the principles of universal design. We're very excited about the accessibility that online events provide. Because of this format, we're able to reach people who might not otherwise be able to make our events because of everything from distance to immune issues to physical access barriers. Even when we return to an in-person format, we will follow guidelines put forth by immunocompromised and high-risk people to ensure events are as safe as possible. We now plan to make sure that all of our future in-person readings and workshops are in a hybrid format, simultaneously cast online. Here's what you can do kind of this afternoon to help us ensure that the space remains accessible. Please mute your microphone when you are not speaking to help cut down on distractions and background noise. Be aware if you're taking up a lot of space and try to make room for everyone. Use the raise your hand feature or post in the chat if you want to say something. Try to speak slowly and clearly for others to hear you and for the ASL interpreter to follow along. Use the slow down or backward arrows button in the Zoom reactions if things are moving too fast. Please be aware that people may have different levels of comfort speaking and interacting in the space, and allow everyone to participate on their own terms. If you feel comfortable, please share your pronouns by editing your name to include them. Please give content warnings if you are about to share something that might cause someone else discomfort. Remember that this is your space to use as respectfully as you need. You are free to turn off your camera, use the chat function, or make requests as you need to do what you need to do. And look for links to access copies in the chat. For workshops, we will be sending out a recording of the event afterwards to all attendees via email as well. So all of the links that you're going to need to follow along will be in the chat. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to CT, I think. Thank you so much.
Oh, wow. Okay, thank you, Cal and CD. It's really cool to just be here. This is the best way I can spend a Sunday afternoon, honestly, is talking with poets and just figuring out poetry together. So I'm CT Salazar. I am a poet living in the Mississippi Delta. I've been here for a year. I love it immensely. I'm a lifelong Mississippian. But let me just go ahead and get my slides up and make sure I can do this well. There we go. Okay. And let me make sure I can see the chat too. Fantastic. Okay. So this is not by any means a lecture. This is, I have a better time when when we can just have a conversation together. So there is no single point throughout this that your input is not valued. So feel free to use the chat or the microphone or however you need to contribute, because I think that your ideas should be the most memorable part of this workshop for us. So when I was asked to do a workshop and it was told that, the idea and theme was completely up to me, because my book came out this year in February, Headless John the Baptist Hitchhiking, I've really been thinking about the headspace that I was in for about the 7 years that this book was being written. And I wanted to kind of unpack that now that I'm a distance away from it, that I can look back and understand that headspace a little bit better and try to unpack the the ways I was thinking about writing and some of the things that helped me move through writing the poems that make that book, and try to see if that made a workshop that was generative for other folks as well. So we have very simple workshop goals, and the first one is something that I'm always thinking about, and there's 4 specific elements that I think contribute to like the ecology of a poem. And I want to spend a little bit of time today working through those 4 elements and how to keep them in mind when we're writing, when we're drafting, before we move into like the revision space. And then the second is something that I remain baffled by that poetry can do, and that's how a poem is both capable of articulating despair in very specific ways that are both individual and collective, as well as like making this poem-wide space where we're not necessarily occupied by that despair. And then the last thing borrows its idea from Audre Lorde, specifically her essay, Poetry is Not a Luxury. It's easily available online, and I will, before the workshop's over, I'll drop that link since I don't think I provided it. But that's to write a poem that's so sure of its own possibility, it helps enact a reality where that kind of believing can be true. So first, the kind of 2 key words of the workshop, right? What's headlessness and what's despair? First, despair is not something that I want to define for you. If you can, take a few moments and try to articulate to yourself on paper if you want, or on like phone notes, or just any way that's helpful for you to just articulate what despair is to yourself. And the dictionary definition is an utter loss of hope, which I think leaves a lot to be desired for a definition. But I think I do want to talk about what's headlessness. So I went through a point in my thinking, in my living, and in my writing where trying to be a Southerner in the 21st century and also just trying to be an American in the 21st century was a very like beheading sensation. Because I feel like I was living through a lot of contradictions, whether they're like the systemic injustice that we all live through every day right now, and the ideas of like democracy that we're supposed to take as the core values of our country. Just everything about trying to be a person right now, especially while I was writing my collection, it felt like logic was cast aside and that I was walking around supposed to be a person without any rationale. And I spent a lot of time also working through ideas of faith and kind of reaching the interesting conclusion that like being an ideal believer is kind of a headless person as well. And I don't mean that as an insult to anyone who is a believer, but simply that the space of faith, I guess, takes up the area in which logic and rationale would cast doubt that it would take to not, like, can't have that to be a believer, if that makes sense. So I don't want like the theory of all of this to get in the way of like just writing and enjoying poetry. So I do want to read a poem together, if that's okay. And this is one of my all-time favorite poems, and it is a poem I visited a lot when I was writing initially. And one of my closest mentors, Eldamar Wilson, shared this with me, and it's Jenny Johnson from her collection In Full Velvet, Summoning the Body That Is Mine When I Close My Eyes. And if it's all right with everyone, I'm just gonna like read it straight through. Summoning the body that is mine when I close my eyes. Come, second heartbeat, sounding in the breast. Come, prismatic light, dissembling. Come, familiar spirit. Come, bare-chested in the weeds. Come, private imposter. Come, hidden ballast, come sudden departures, come stress without shape, because belief is odd. Come swaggering answer, come invisible ink, come beatific scrawl, come as squirrels are climbing backwards, come as dogwoods blossom, come apart. Come strumming an unspeakable power ballad through a torrent of rain with cheeks flushed scarlet. Come down the rusty metal slide, come belted kingfisher flapping, come lavender asters wheeling, come loose. A sapling lengthening, come honeysuckle, come glistening. What I really was drawn to about this poem initially, let's make sure I got the chat open as well. Yeah, okay, great. There was something in it that something about it kept it at the top of my head for years. And it was how this level of optimism and this level of believing about the body's future stuck with me, that there was a kind of transformation in it. And I realized that the poetry I was writing was lacking this kind of transformation, that there were things in it that felt great to me that I myself wasn't writing toward. And this poem kind of became a compass point to me, like a second north that I could move toward. And I began writing toward ways that offered myself a transformation in the world that I was living in. And it helped me kind of balance my own idea of despair and try and be able to both articulate it, but also not be occupied by it, if that makes sense. And we're going to talk about, I'd mentioned at the beginning, the 4 elements that I want to look at closer. And they are, I think, a part of this poem. But before we do that, I also want to throw another one at you. Let's see. So this is Thicket by Atsuro Riley. This is from his second collection, Herd Horde. And there's just a lot that I love about Atsuro in general, but before we jump in, I'll just read it straight through. Thicket. We come, gnawed by need on hands and knees. As a creature nosing, Grubble seeks a spring. As bendy spined as bandy snakes through salt shrub you pawn needle break. For darkling green, for thorns surround this absorbing, quaggy crampled ground of briar canes intervolved with kudzu mesh and mold. Of these convoluted vines we grasp to suck, to taste the pith, the lumen, the cell sap pulse, to try to know some sour sharp something about something. Lumen is as lumen does, a little room for turmoil to grow lucid in. In here, where Clary set her cart tongue down and dug and brailed, in here where Tynan breathed, we grasp to suck, to taste what light. Let loose the bell that bows us down, bow down. And this was a poem that, in the same way of Jenny Johnson's, before I realized what I loved about it, I was gravitating towards the ideas of it. And I asked you to think through some of your ideas of despair. And if you want, I can share mine at this point, or you can let me know yours. So anyone that feels at least comfortable sharing. I know I didn't tell you. Oh, you put it in the chat. Beautiful. Not to put anyone on the spot. If you don't want to share, you do not have to. But so I'll just read what Cal put in. Being shattered, ? Being broken for what despair is. It's beautiful, yes. Cecilia, oh hey Cecilia, I'm glad you're here. Despair is the isolation of being in a blank space. Phenomenal. I love asking poets to define things because we're just so much better than any dictionary. Skylar says, bottomless, heavy, clinging to. Oh, definitely. These are very much all things that I think about when I think about despair. Ben says, despair stares down the neck of headlessness. Oh. Feeling stranded in any emotion. I love that. Yes. I feel like for me, it's the realization that suffering underlies almost all beauties. Wow. That's very like sublime too, Will. Yeah. Beautiful. I'll leave that open too in case other folks still want to put in their ideas. So I had eventually, way after reading these poems and feeling a draw to them, I encountered an essay of Adrienne Rich's where just in a paragraph, in an essay that was not about despair. So the paragraph was very much a tangent or a little bit of a side note. She defined despair, and it was like years of my life like clicked and made sense when I read this paragraph from her. Get it on here. So this is from Audre Lorde's essay, What Would We Create? And she says, we see despair when social arrogance and indifference exist in the same person, with the willingness to live at devastating levels of superficiality and self-trivialization. We see despair in the self-hatred that clogs the lives of so many materially comfortable citizens. And then this last sentence of hers just, I have lost sleep thinking about this. Despair, when not the response to absolute physical and moral defeat, is like war, the failure of imagination. So all of our definitions, all of the definitions that everyone provided are so phenomenal. And I'm constantly on the fence, even how I feel about Adrienne Rich here with this definition, in the ways in which despair could be the failure of the imagination. But what drew me to it was the idea that, like, because poems are naturally imaginative spaces, why I always gravitated or felt that there was an axis that I could be on. You know, like I'm either deep in despair or despair is in my head taking up way too much space, or I'm writing poetry. I always felt like I was in between those two things. So Adrienne Rich with this quote at least kind of helped me make sense of that feeling, that when I'm writing a poem, when I'm using my imagination, I'm at least in a space that is a little bit of defying despair. What do you guys think about that, though? Do you agree with Rich or no?
That's so tricky. That's such a
Yeah.
I mean, this paragraph is fabulous and totally fascinating, but I mean, when not the response to absolute physical and moral defeat is like really hard to define even, right? So like
Yeah.
where are the real lines there that we want to draw, right? I get all wrapped up in the specificities of it, but I think this is a really useful definition.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you're completely right, Cal. Like, there's definitely elements of this where I have to critique the privilege and comfort of someone writing it, you know. But yeah, I think it can be useful even if I have my own kind of trepidations around the language. Skylar says, I think that I want her to go a step further. Oh wow, yeah, and realize that the failure is the follow through of the imaginative, especially associated. Wow. Am I pronouncing your name correctly, by the way? I'm saying Skylar, is that?
Yeah, it's Skylar.
Okay, sorry. I wanted to make sure. But yeah, no, I think that's a really, wow. I'm gonna think about that for a while now. To go a step further, that the failure is in the follow through of the imaginative. Yes. So when I was reading this and really for the first time and thinking about like how poetry, when I'm in the poetic space, when I'm actively either writing or revising or thinking through, maybe just going on a walk and thinking about a poem, how I'm not in a space that really has a lot of room for despair in a lot of ways. I started thinking about like the elements of the poem that don't uh, don't let something like despair really thrive. I know Gregory Orr has 4 elements. So a lot of people, when I talk about these, they think that I'm talking about Gregory Orr's, which I do love. I do love his. But the ones I was thinking of, I think I got them on the next slide. Let me see. Yeah. So these are the 4 things that I really gravitate to when I'm writing my own poems, when I'm reading the poetry of others. And the first is voice, which I have always found this hard to define, and everyone defines voice in a poem differently, and I'm really interested in that. The closest I've got with a definition that I am satisfied with is the spectrum of syntax, tone, and intent. And I recognize that even that definition has a lot of flaws, but that's at least as close as I've been able to get with what I can be happy or satisfied with. The second is landscape, which the backdrop of ongoingness, and I should have had a citation there because that actually belongs to Carl Phillips. That's from his book, The Art of Daring. I'll put it in the chat here so that people can see it if they want to go back and look at it later. Sorry, my librarian mind, anytime I see something not cited, I'm like, oof, that's not great. So what I love about the landscape of a poem is it, in a lot of ways, it's actually tied to voice. Like, I speak the way I speak because of where I'm from. I have inclinations of a Southerner. So like my own landscape inhabits how I grammar. And then in a poem, I get to actually grammar the space in which the subject inhabits. So I've always loved the ways that voice and landscape are intermingled in this really unique like social strata or dynamic. And then the third thing I'm always obsessed with in poetry is desire. I think that like for me, I think desire is kind of like the engine of what makes a poem go. And that's probably not true for everyone by far, but I just love I love how desire pushes. And it goes all the way back, like if you know like the really classic story from Ovid of Apollo and Daphne. Like Apollo was hit with one of Cupid's arrows, saw the wood nymph Daphne, and like suddenly was infatuated, chased her. Daphne turned herself into a tree to avoid him. But that moment of desire, of realizing that Apollo, a god, could actually lack something and become ungodly in what he was missing. I always think of that as like the natural or kind of oldest impulse in poetry. And then the last thing that I'm always obsessed with in a poem is the body. And not just the body of the subject or the body of the speaker, but the ways in which a poem reminds us of the presence of our own bodies when we're reading it. I'm always looking for poems that in the fact of me reading it, I can be reminded that I am a full person. Like, you know, we read with our eyes and parts of our brain, but I think a really good poem makes us read in a lot of ways with our entire body and become more aware of it as we're reading. So when all of these things work together really well, I think they form a type of ecology that kind of helps the poem overcome itself. And I hope I have it on the next slide. Let's see. Yeah, so this is a poet and essayist, Dan Beachy Quick. And he says that the poem that the poem must create within its own thinking a momentum strong enough to break its own limits. And I just want to stay on that first sentence for a little bit. That like because it's this moment of a poem kind of overcoming itself, and I think that it's very much for me those four things: the desire, landscape, voice, and body that help the poem gain the momentum and not just fulfill itself, but a little bit break itself open. So, and he goes on to say that form marks the boundary in which knowledge comes to be knowable. Necessity of the poem to forge on the blank page the nature of its formal life. Epistemological crisis which the poem creates in order to discover. And that last sentence really rings for me because a lot of why I'm writing at all is to not just understand the world or understand something about the world I'm living in better, but to understand actually how I feel about it. Like, I really started writing because I was noticing that once I could articulate how I feel about a certain something, I actually understood myself in relation to that thing a lot better, in a lot more genuine sense too. So I very much write not just for like discovery, but for self-discovery. And I think that the poem that helps us do that is a really valuable thing. And with all that in mind, I want to give the first part of a writing prompt for us. Let's see. So to think through the language that's particular to you. And that goes back to the idea that where we're from gives us a bit of our voice, but that can also be something beyond that. Like there's a lot of my own vocabulary that I gravitate toward in writing because certain words have, I think, higher value to me because of who in my life says them, or because words that I was raised with mean more to me because of maybe it was like a formidable years thing, but just being around people I loved who use certain words and then how that meshes into my own vocabulary. An example of that for me is the word farm truck, as funny as that is. Let me put it in the chat. And I love it as one word. I love it as a compound. So like growing up in Mississippi, I had a lot of family that were farmers, whether cattle farmers or row croppers. And there was always the farm truck. And sometimes it was like an SUV, sometimes it was an actual truck like a Chevy. But I love, because I would hear that term so often and it became just a regular thing to me. And when I think about it and even write farm truck, I have such a specific idea that others may not have. But take just a little bit and think through some of the words and some of the turns of phrase that you know so well because you grew up with it. The words that people you love regularly use around you. If anyone wants to share those words too, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm really glad all of you are here, by the way, too. It's neat to like look in the chat and see so many names I know and people I've never met as well. I love seeing like how poets show up for each other. Sometimes, yeah, I love that. That's such a question of tense too. Wow, yeah. It's a habit I often edit out. I think I had a few more poems too for us. Booyah is a word my family taught me. It's a soup. Okay.
Yeah, it's a soup.
Dibs, the word in the whole messy notion. Yes, I love that too. Okay, let's see. I think I've got a short poem for us afterward too. Yeah. Full disclosure, this is one of my mentors. I love him to death, L. Lamar Wilson. When I was just a very, very small baby poet, L. Lamar was someone who really encouraged me to keep going, and someone I could look to and kind of model what a good poet is doing. This is a poem of his that was published in Poetry this year, I think, but about Tanka or Tonka. Buzzards, figure 8 over browned pampas, stalk whiffs of beheaded canes, corpses in spindly bare limbs. Full, we spoon, milk noon's languor. I wanted to just include this poem with us because, I mean, not only does it actually have the word beheaded, but it's the how Lamar is using the form of this poem and the nature of his sentence structure. It comes across as a very headless kind of pursuit. I love it because you get so deep in that first sentence, which is most of the poem, not knowing which word yet is the subject or the verbs and the objects. That's one that I usually have to read a few times to kind of orient. And then the last line is just a sentence in and of itself, but it's so slow. With the commas, we have to take these spaces. Full, we spoon, milk noon's languor. I love how Lamar is using this space so small. The Tonka is such a small poem, but what's happening with landscape, voice, body, and desire, it's overflowing at the same time. There's so much sound in this poem. I think there's also such a sense of vulnerability, and that you can confront despair with tenderness in a lot of ways. So I think I've got one more in here too. Yeah. This is Danez Smith, all-time favorite of mine. They're just one of the best poets to me writing, period. But I love how they take everything about despair and they've put out something so tender and gorgeous. I'll just read it straight through. Tonight in Oakland. I did not come here to sing a blues. Lately I opened my mouth and out comes marigolds, yellow plums. I came to make the sky a garden. Give me rain or give me honey, dear Lord. The sky has given us no water this year. I ride my bike to a boy. When I get there, what we make will not be beautiful or love at all, but it will be deserved. I've started seeking men to wet the harvest. Come, tonight I declare we must move instead of pray. Tonight, east of here, 2 boys, one dressed in what could be blood, and one dressed in what could be blood before the wound meet, and mean mug, and God, tonight let them dance. Tonight the bullet does not exist. Tonight the police have turned to their God for forgiveness. Tonight we bury nothing. We serve a God with no need for shovels. We serve a God with a bad hip and a brother in prison. Tonight, let every man be his own Lord. Let wherever 2 people stand be a reunion of ancient lights. Let's waste the moon's marble glow, shouting our names to the stars until we are the stars. Oh, precious God, oh, sweet black town, I am drunk and I thirst. When I get to the boy who lets me practice hunger with him, I will not give him the name of your newest ghost. I will give him my body, and what he does with it is none of my business. But I will say, look, I made it a whole day. Still no rain. Still, I am without exit wound. And he will say, tonight, I want to take you how the police do, unarmed and sudden. And tonight, when we dream of dancing in a city slowly becoming ash. Though, I mean, there's a lot in this poem that works for me, but one of the first things that stood out, and every time I reread it, something that immediately stands out is the condition of tonight, right? Like there is so much that could come, but everything on this poem hinges on this idea of tonight. Like the poem has created the space in which we could live in the time of tonight without having to be occupied by whatever is hammering down the door of the speaker. And it's a lot. If you read, this comes from Danez's second book. The name of the collection escapes me right now, but it fits of a whole suite. Homie. No, it's not Homie. It's a different one, I'm pretty sure, CD. What was the collection before Homie? Oh no, I'm so bad. I'll have to look it up. Don't Call Us Dead. Thank you, Cal. Yes, sorry. Yeah. So this is from Don't Call Us Dead. And like you do need to read the whole collection because it is gorgeous. And I think that collection of itself is a master class in kind of entering a space where you can't be touched by that deeper despair that's happening. Yeah, let's see. Oh, yeah, I almost forgot too. So because this is Open Mouth, which is in Arkansas, one of my all-time favorite poets that teaches me the most, especially when it comes to ecology and joy and writing through like voice and landscape, is Bess Miller Brigham. And she spent most of her adult life in Arkansas. So I'm always looking for excuses to like bring her into a space. So this will be the last one we read together. Bess Miller there's a whole interesting history behind her work and her life in general, but she's not well known. So I do encourage you to go and read what you can and find from her. But this is her poem, We Will Not Burn Our Trash Brush Piles This Year. Rabbits live under them, snakes, frogs, a haven of rats, field rodents, fuzz creatures, insect webs unravel deep in new growth about the discarded limbs. Quail run beneath on sight-closed pathways. A young tree sprouts shooting up from under mold-sogged boards. In fingers of brilliance, the earth weaves in the light. It is an eyesore to those not accustomed to orderliness. The quail crosses the road. Watchful, one scurries from premeditated danger. They wait. Another race, like shuttle needles in the grass, a long, thin snake, string of purple ribbon. This runner was caught yesterday by a car. We lay it dead in the weeds. Rabbits roll in the yard, happy fur clowns. We find their hide places. Out from our steps, from secret shutters, they rage against our intrusion. A field mouse nest, built high among needles of a young pine. Ground babies, the grass children, how with aggressive eyes they know our ways. This is, if you don't know Bess Miller, she'll take something around her and just give it so much attention and unpack the beautiful festering ecology of the entire world, and she can put it in a poem. So let me see how long I've talked. Okay. With all of this in mind, the prompts that I want to leave us with and have time to write through today The second one we covered a little bit of. Think through the language that's particular to you, and try writing a poem more invested in that language, in your language in particular. I love like when poems are written with the particulars, and even if we don't know those details, I feel like as readers we can see the poet's investment in their language. And the second prompt, which is the first one on the screen because I'm very bad at ordering things. The second prompt deals more with the ideas of despair that we talked through. And the way to do this one, if you can, there's a lot of steps, but think of 2 things you know for a fact and 3 things you don't know. And these need to be as concrete as you can make them. And the examples I gave were, I know my mother's birthday, but a thing I don't know is I don't know how many spiders live in my house. And despair is defined as the utter loss of hope. How would you define it without saying the word despair? And because this is a love poem, something has to fall in love. That can be a person, that can be your hometown with the most beautiful sunset on record, whatever you need. How are you guys feeling? Do you feel like you could write? Yeah, cool. Great question. How long do we have?
There you are, you are creating that lexicon.
I'll set a timer for about,
And you're also,
let's say 7 minutes.
I think, some
just-
of your drafts you may find
If that's all right with you guys. Okay, that was the 7-minute timer. But I also don't want to rush something that could be very great. And I feel like everyone probably has different like processes of revision, but um, lately I've like been trying to understand revision as kind of the point in which I can apply whatever my like values, my politics. Um, one thing that some really dear writers taught me that I should try to avoid is moments when I am writing and I uh, limit the world or anyone in the world to just one thing and one thing only. And that's now when I revisit drafts and when I'm in the process of revision, that's something I'm looking out for is moments in which I've I guess chopped the world down and kind of limited what it can be. I don't know if with these workshop spaces, if it's kind of the norm for folks to share if they've written something they like, but if you want to share, please feel free to. Okay, good. Yeah, CD, the organizer, says, please share if you want. Beautiful. I'm a I'm a notoriously slow writer, so I can I set timers for myself sometimes because it helps me to like have the defined space to write. But I usually in my own writing life, I'm writing like 1 or 2 lines a week, maybe. So I also know it's pressure to write something and then have to share it. So I'm not trying to apply that to you. But if nobody wants to share, though, uh, I do want you to. Oh, we got a hand raised. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. I was kind of waiting to see if anybody else wanted to go, but if not, this feels unfinished, but I'm gonna share what I've started. Milkweed smells like old books, so when I'm homesick, I go to the used bookstore. I used to bury my nose in each codex before selecting the earthiest one. Now I must gamble. Feel the thread count of the pages, note whether they are grayed or yellowed. Different types of paper degrade into different colors and aromas. My friend's latest book will never smell like the milkweed he writes about. The milkweed towering over my young body on field trips to the prairie.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That was gorgeous. I love the milkweed heaviness of it too. Like, yeah, more milkweed poems for sure.
I'll share one really quick. It's really weird right now, but I was just kind of trying to combine multiple words together like you had suggested. So I'll put it in the chat as well. It's really short, but just looking at the tree outside. I know the leaves will green yellow, then yellowed orange, then oranged red, then reddened dead, then deadened dead, then dead again.
Wow. Oh, that's awesome, Ben. Thank you.
And I know we've talked about Cormac McCarthy kind of doing that in the past, where he just does such a good masterwork of taking 2 words and making them into one new word. So that was fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Much love to the new compounds. Can I ask too, like, has anyone read any good like poetry collections recently? Or reading right now that you're like really, really wanting to share that we should be reading? One for me that's been like blowing me away, and I can put it in the chat, is Luisa Amesca's Fighting is Like a Wife. It's their second collection of poems, and oh, Hum, yeah, Hum is a phenomenal book. Yeah. How good, you guys know Elisa, sweet. Yeah, Jamal's such a great poet. His second book too is really, really outstanding. But yeah, it's hard to top Hum, that first one. Diaries of a Terrorist, yeah, yeah. What a long-awaited debut too. Like Soto has been writing that book, I feel like, for so long, and now it's here in the world. It's outstanding. Well, I don't have anything else to share, so if no one else wants to share, I want to thank you guys for just being here with me and writing with me. I really appreciate all of you. And like I said, this is the best way to spend a Sunday for me. Brandon, oh, Brandon, hey. Matthew Dickman's Husbandry, sweet. Meditations on Fatherhood and Divorce, okay.
Well, so much for coming on this Sunday. It's wonderful to hear y'all's thoughts, see everybody participating in all of this. So thank you for being here, spending that time with us. Just wanted to plug that CT will be reading later today at 7 p.m. Central Time on Zoom. Put that link in there as well for the Eventbrite. Also, buy CT Salazar's book. A link for it, Headless John the Baptist Hitchhiking. So definitely check it out. Support poets. But thank you all for coming so much. Have a wonderful rest of your Sunday.